The late August sky over Willow Creek hung heavy, a bruised tapestry of gray and amber as the sun sank behind the rolling hills. The air was thick with the scent of parched earth and the faint sweetness of overripe peaches, carried on a sluggish breeze that barely stirred the cottonwoods. Harvest Haven stood at the edge of town, its white clapboard walls weathered by decades of Tennessee summers, its neon open sign buzzing faintly in the dusk. Inside, the diner thrummed with life, the clatter of plates, the hiss of grease on the griddle, the weary laughter of locals who'd known these booths since they were kids. To them, it was a refuge from the world's chaos. To Grace Holloway, it was a tether to everything she'd lost and a burden she carried like a stone in her chest. Grace eased her rusted pickup into the gravel lot, parking beneath the sprawling branches of an old sycamore, its leaves curling brown from the drought. She cut the engine, the silence crashing over her like a wave. At 37, she wore the scars of a life spent clawing her way through hardship, hands rough from years of hauling hay, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights since her father's death 3 summers ago. Harvest Haven had been his dream, a diner born from the sweat of his brow and the recipes of her mother, who'd filled it with warmth until cancer stole her away when Grace was barely 20. Now it was hers, a legacy she'd fought to preserve even as grief gnawed at her edges. She hadn't been here in months, leaving it to Paul Grayson, her father's old friend and the man who'd held her together when the world shattered. But tonight, something dragged her back, a restless ache, a whisper from the past she couldn't ignore. She pulled her faded ball cap low, slipped out of the truck, and stepped into the fading light, her boots crunching on the dry stones. The side door groaned as she pushed it open, the smell of fried green tomatoes and cornbread slamming into her like a memory. It was her mother's kitchen all over again, the clink of cast-iron skillets, the hum of a lullaby she hadn't heard in years. Grace slipped into a booth near the back, her fingers tracing the initials she'd carved into the wood as a kid, GH99. The walls were a patchwork of history, black and white photos of her grandfather with his mule team, her father grinning beside a tractor, her own gap-toothed smile at a county fair, clutching a blue ribbon. This place was her blood, her roots, her everything, and yet she'd let herself drift, burying herself in the farm's endless demands while Paul kept the diner's heart beating, or so she'd thought. The room buzzed with the late summer crowd, farmers with dirt-caked boots, teachers escaping the school year's end, retirees nursing iced tea and gossip. Servers darted through the chaos, their aprons streaked with sweat and gravy, their smiles stretched thin. Grace's eyes landed on Marisol Vega, a young woman she'd hired last fall after a quiet plea for work. Marisol was small, her dark hair scraped into a messy bun, her hands trembling as she balanced a tray of biscuits and mason jars brimming with tea. Grace remembered her shy gratitude. "Thank you, ma'am. You don't know what this means," and the haunted look in her eyes, like she'd been running from something. Now, that gratitude was gone, replaced by a hollow stillness. Marisol set the tray down, her fingers lingering on the edge as if it were her last anchor, her gaze flicking toward the kitchen, with a fear that stopped Grace cold. Paul Grayson loomed at the pass-through, his broad frame a wall of flannel and muscle. His face was weathered, etched with lines from too many summers in the sun, his forearms scarred from a barn fire he'd survived with her father decades ago. He'd been family once, carrying Grace on his shoulders as a kid, sitting with her through the long nights after her mother's funeral, stepping in when her father's heart gave out under a harvest moon in 21. She'd trusted him with her life, with this place, when grief left her drowning. But tonight, his presence was different, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp as he barked, "Vega, table 6 is waiting. Move your ass." Marisol flinched, a small, involuntary jerk that Grace felt in her own bones. She nodded quickly, scurrying off with her head bowed, her tray rattling faintly. Grace's stomach twisted into a knot. She knew that flinch, her mother's shadow shrinking under her father's roar, her voice fading to a whisper over years of quiet surrender. Grace had sworn she'd never let that poison take root here, in the one place she'd vowed to keep pure. But as she watched Paul, his gaze tracking Marisol with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. Doubt clawed at her throat. This wasn't the man she'd known, or maybe she'd never really known him at all. She stayed rooted, her coffee cooling untouched, her ears straining through the chatter. Then she heard it, a soft, broken sob, drifting from the hallway near the break room. It was faint, muffled by the clink of dishes, the kind of cry you let out when you think no one's left to care. Grace stood, her boots silent on the worn hardwood as she edged closer, her heart thudding against her ribs. The break room door hung ajar, and inside, Marisol sat crumpled on a folding chair, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent, wrenching sobs, each one a shard of glass in Grace's chest. Beside her knelt Caleb Jennings, a lanky kid with red hair and freckles like a constellation across his face. He'd started here at 16 bussing tables to help his single mom, and stayed on with a quiet loyalty Grace had always admired. Now, his voice trembled with a mix of fear and fury, his hands hovering near Marisol's shoulder. "You can't keep doing this, Mari," he said, his words raw and urgent. "He's killing you piece by piece. Tell Grace, tell the sheriff, tell someone." Marisol's head snapped up, her eyes swollen and bloodshot, her cheeks streaked with tears. "I can't, Caleb," she choked, her accent thick with exhaustion and despair. "He'll fire me, and my mom, she's dying. Stage 4. No insurance, just me and these shitty tips. If I lose this, she's gone, and I'll have nothing left." Grace's breath seized, her hand gripping the doorframe until her knuckles ached. She saw her own mother in Marisol's face, the skeletal frame, the hollow eyes, the hospital bed where she'd whispered, "Be strong, Gracie," before slipping away. She backed off, her vision blurring, and stumbled back to her booth. The coffee sat there, cold and bitter, a mirror to the guilt flooding her veins. She'd let this happen, let Paul twist her sanctuary into a nightmare, because she'd been too lost in her own pain to see the cracks. She watched Paul now, her eyes narrowing beneath her cap. He prowled the diner like a wolf, his voice cutting through the hum. "Jennings, quit slacking, those tables won't clear themselves." Caleb flinched, hurrying back to work, his shoulders hunched. Paul's gaze lingered on Marisol, a smirk tugging at his lips as she fumbled a glass, tea splashing across the tray. "Clumsy tonight, Vega," he sneered, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "Better shape up or you're out." Grace's fists clenched under the table, nails digging into her palms until they bled. She'd always known Paul was rough, her father had been too. His temper a storm that shook their house, but this wasn't discipline. This was cruelty, deliberate and deep, a blade pressed to the throats of people too fragile to fight back. She needed more than her own eyes, she needed their voices. She caught Caleb as he passed, his arms trembling under a stack of plates. "Hey," she said, her voice low and steady. "Got a minute?" He froze, his green eyes darting nervously. "You a regular?" Something like that. "I saw Marisol back there. She okay?" Caleb's jaw tightened, his freckles stark against his paling skin. "She's fine, just tired." "Don't bullshit me," Grace said, her tone soft but unyielding. "I know tired, that's not it." He glanced toward the kitchen, where Paul was yelling at a cook over a cold order. "It's not my place," he muttered, shifting the plates. "Caleb," Grace pressed, leaning in, her voice a lifeline. "I'm not here to make trouble. I just need the truth." He swallowed hard, his voice dropping to a whisper, barely audible over the diner's hum. "It's Paul. He's been on her since day one, tears her down, keeps her late every damn night. Calls it in training, but it's sick. She's terrified, Grace, I mean, ma'am. Won't say it out loud, but I see it in her eyes." Grace's blood turned to ice, her heart pounding so loud she could hear it. "How long?" "Since spring," Caleb said, his voice cracking. "I tried once, told him she was crying in the alley after a shift. He laughed, said she's weak, needs to toughen up or get out. I should have fought harder, but I'm scared too. My mom's barely scraping by, I can't lose this." "You're fighting now," Grace said, her voice fierce with pride and pain. "Why doesn't she walk away?" "Her mom," Caleb said, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Cancer bad. Marisol's all she's got. Paul knows it, uses it like a leash. She's trapped and he loves it." Grace nodded, her throat so tight she could barely breathe. "Thanks, Caleb. Watch out for her, okay? She's not alone anymore." He gave a shaky nod and hurried off, leaving Grace with a fire in her gut she hadn't felt since the day she scattered her father's ashes over the fields. She spent the next 2 hours watching, her phone tucked against her thigh, recording every venomous word Paul spat. "Vega, you're staying late again, don't give me that look," he snapped as Marisol nodded mutely, her hands trembling so hard she nearly dropped a plate. Grace caught the way the others shrank Ellie, the teenage hostess, ducking her head as she passed. Amos, the grizzled cook, keeping his eyes on the grill, even the dishwasher, a quiet boy named Miguel, flinching at Paul's shadow. Fear was a living thing here, a rot seeping into the bones of the place she'd built with love. By 11 p.m., the crowd thinned, leaving a scattering of late-night stragglers, truckers sipping coffee, a widow picking at her pie. Grace slipped outside, the humid night air clinging to her skin like a second grief. She leaned against the diner's siding, the rough wood biting into her back as she replayed the recordings. Each word was a wound, Marisol's whispered. "Yes, sir." Caleb's choked. "She's trapped. Paul's smug shape up or ship out." Tears streamed down her face, hot and unstoppable, her chest heaving with sobs she couldn't stifle. She'd let this fester, let her father's memory curdle into something vile, because she'd been too afraid to face the truth. Harvest Haven was her heart, and she'd let it bleed. The back door creaked open, and Ellie stepped out, her hands trembling as she lit a cigarette. Grace wiped her eyes, stepping into the dim light. "Long night?" she asked, her voice rough but steady. Ellie jumped, then exhaled a thin plume of smoke. "Yeah, you still here?" "Couldn't leave," Grace said, her tone heavy. "You look shaken. Paul getting to you too?" Ellie's fingers tightened on the cigarette, her eyes darting to the door. "He's always a bastard. Worse tonight snapped at me for seating a walk-in too slow, like I'm supposed to magic tables out of thin air." Marisol seemed off too, Grace said, watching her closely. Ellie took a long drag, her voice dropping to a hiss. "She's a mess. Paul's got her staying late again alone. I've heard her crying in the bathroom, seen her jump when he calls her name. We all have me, Caleb, Amos. She's breaking and he's loving it. Why doesn't she say something?" Grace asked, her voice trembling with the weight of the answer she already knew. "She's scared shitless," Ellie said, her voice cracking. "Paul's got power, runs this place like a king. Last guy who complained Tommy got fired 2 days later. Paul spread word he stole cash, pure lies. Tommy's working gas stations now, can't get a decent job anywhere. Marisol's got no choice." Grace's stomach churned, bile rising sharp and bitter. "Thanks, Ellie. You're tougher than you think." Ellie snorted, stomping out her cigarette. "Just don't tell him I talked. I need this paycheck, my dad's drinking again." Grace nodded, her chest aching as Ellie slipped back inside. She stood there, the night pressing in, her mind a storm of rage and shame. She couldn't wait, couldn't let another shift end with Marisol's tears. She marched back in, finding Marisol wiping down a table, her movements slow and mechanical, her eyes red-rimmed and vacant. Grace approached, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. "Marisol," she said, her voice soft but unshakable. "We need to talk." Marisol froze, clutching the rag like a shield, her voice barely a whisper. I'm working, ma'am." "It's important," Grace said, stepping closer. "Please." Marisol hesitated, her eyes darting nervously, then led Grace to a corner near the jukebox, its faint twang masking their words. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling, her hands twisting the rag until her knuckles whitened. Grace took a deep breath, her hands steady despite the tempest inside. "I know about Paul. The late shifts, the way he treats you. I'm not here to push, just tell me if it's true." Marisol's eyes filled with tears, her breath hitching as sobs clawed their way out. He says I'm nothing without this job," she choked, her voice raw and broken. "That I'm lucky he keeps me around. If I don't stay late, do what he wants, he'll fire me. My mom's dying chemo every week. No insurance, just me. I can't lose her, I can't." Her knees buckled, and she sank against the wall, her cries tearing through the air like a wounded animal. Grace dropped to her knees beside her, tears streaming down her own face, her hands hovering before gently gripping Marisol's shoulders. "You're not nothing," she said, her voice fierce and shattered. "You're stronger than he'll ever know. Stronger than I've been. And you're not losing her, not tonight. Not because of him. Marisol shook her head, sobs racking her small frame. He'll ruin me. He's everywhere. You don't know what he's like. He won't, Grace said, her voice rising with a fury she couldn't contain. Because I do. Marisol looked up, her tear-streaked face creased with confusion. Who are you? Grace pulled off her cap, her auburn hair tumbling free, her eyes burning with resolve. Grace Holloway. This is my diner. Marisol's gasp was a fragile, shattered sound, her hands flying to her mouth as fresh tears spilled. Before she could speak, Paul's voice thundered across the room, heavy with menace. Vega, what the hell's going on over there? He stormed over, his face flushed with rage, his eyes narrowing as he sized Grace up. Who's this? Some bleeding heart wasting my time? Grace rose, stepping between him and Marisol, her stance unyielding as granite. We're done pretending, Paul. Office. Now. The diner fell silent, forks clattering to plates, every eye turning. Paul smirked, but it wavered, his confidence cracking. Sure, lady. Let's see what you've got. In the cramped office, surrounded by stacks of yellowed invoices and a flickering bulb, Paul leaned against the desk, his arms crossed, his bravado a thin mask. What's this about? Vega whining again? She's soft, needs a spine. Grace didn't sit. She played the recordings, Marisol's trembling pleas, Caleb's choked fury, Ellie's shaky confession, Paul's own venomous snarls. With each word, his smirk dissolved, his face paling until it was ashen. You've been terrorizing my people, Grace said, her voice low and lethal, vibrating with a rage she could barely contain. Turning my home into a cage. This ends tonight, Paul laughed, a harsh, desperate bark. You don't get it, Grace. They're weak, need a firm hand. Your daddy knew that. He'd be spinning in his grave, seeing you coddle them like this. Grace's hand slammed onto the desk, the sound a gunshot in the small room, her voice breaking into a roar. Don't you dare speak for him. Tears poured down her face, hot and furious. He was tough, not a monster. You're a coward, Paul preying on people too broken to fight back, twisting everything he built into something ugly. You're done. He straightened, his eyes blazing, his voice rising to match hers. You can't fire me. I've kept this place alive while you hid on that damn farm, crying over ghosts. You're nothing without me. You've kept it dying. Grace shouted, her voice cracking with grief and rage. You've poisoned it, everything I love, everything they trusted me to protect. Get out. And if I hear you've pulled this anywhere else, I'll make sure every soul in Tennessee knows the snake you are. Paul's fists clenched, his breath ragged, his eyes wild with a cornered animal's fear. But he saw the fire in her, the same fire her father had carried, the same fire that had kept her standing when the world collapsed. He grabbed his jacket, his boots stomping a furious rhythm as he stormed out, the door slamming so hard, the frame splintered. Grace sank into the chair, her body shaking, sobs tearing free in great, heaving gasps. She'd lost her parents, her peace, and now the man she'd loved like family. But the real wound was deeper. She'd failed the people who'd looked to her, who'd trusted her to keep this place safe. She wiped her face, forcing herself to her feet, and stumbled back into the dining room. Marisol stood near the counter, Caleb and Ellie beside her, their faces a tangle of fear, hope, and exhaustion. The remaining customers watched, hushed and wide-eyed. Grace climbed onto a chair, her voice raw and trembling but resolute. Everyone, listen up. I'm Grace Holloway, and this is my place. I've been gone too long, let things rot under my nose. Paul's gone for good, but I need to know what else I've missed. Speak up, I'm begging you. A heavy silence fell, the air thick with uncertainty. Caleb stepped forward, his hands shaking but his voice steady. It's not just Paul. The hour's 12, 14 a day, no breaks. We're scared to complain, afraid we'll end up like Tommy, blacklisted and broke. Ellie nodded, her cigarette-stained fingers twisting together, her voice cracking. He made us feel worthless, like we were nothing, just bodies to push around. Amos, the old cook, spoke next, his gravelly voice cutting through the hush. Been here 30 years, Grace. Seen managers come and go. Paul was the worst, sucked the soul out of this place. We stayed 'cause we love it, not 'cause he made it easy. Marisol's voice came last, soft but piercing, a blade through the silence. I thought no one cared, she said, tears streaming down her face. I thought I had to take it, thought it was my fault. My mom's dying, and I was too scared to lose her to fight. Grace's tears fell freely, her chest caving with a sob she couldn't hold back. I care, she said, her voice breaking into a wail, and I'm so damn sorry I didn't see it sooner. You're not nothing, you're everything. You matter to me, to this place. We're fixing this, together. Shorter shifts, better pay, a way to speak without fear. I can't erase what he did, but I'll fight for you with every breath I've got. A murmur rippled through the room, tentative but swelling with something like hope. Miguel, the dishwasher, spoke up, his voice shy but firm. I got a kid 2 years old. Paul cut my hours when I asked for a day off. Said I didn't deserve it. Grace nodded, her heart shattering anew. You deserve it, Miguel. You all do. The diner stayed open past midnight, not for business, but for something deeper. The staff gathered around the long oak table, sharing stories of Paul's reign, of small victories snatched from the dark, of lives stretched thin by need and love. Grace listened, her coffee forgotten, her hands trembling as she scribbled notes on a napkin, every name, every hurt, every hope. She saw her father in their grit, his stubborn pride, her mother in their quiet strength, her gentle hands kneading dough. She'd built Harvest Haven to honor them, but it was these people, their pain, their resilience, who gave it life. As the clock struck 2 a.m., Grace stood, her voice hoarse but warm. We're not done. Tomorrow we start fresh, new schedules, new rules. But tonight, eat, rest. You've earned it. Amos fired up the grill, the sizzle of bacon filling the air, and Ellie poured tea with a shaky smile. Marisol sat beside Caleb, her sobs quieting as he squeezed her hand, whispering something that made her laugh, a small, broken sound, but real. Dawn crept over Willow Creek, the first light painting the fields in soft gold, chasing away the shadows. Grace stood outside, the air cool against her tear-streaked face, her body aching with exhaustion and a fierce, fragile hope. Marisol joined her, a blanket draped over her shoulders, her eyes still red but alive with something new. You meant it, didn't you? Marisol asked, her voice soft, her hand clutching a crumpled photo of her mother, a frail woman with Marisol's eyes, smiling through pain. About fighting for us? Grace turned, her hand finding Marisol's, gripping it tight. Every breath, every bone, she said, her voice thick with tears and resolve. You're not alone, not now, not ever. Marisol's smile was small, trembling, but it broke through the dark like a sunrise, a crack of light in a world that had tried to crush her. Caleb and Ellie emerged, their voices low as they argued over who'd burned the toast, Amos trailing behind with a gruff laugh. Grace watched them, her chest swelling with a love so fierce it hurt, a love for this place, these people, this fight. She'd nearly lost. She'd failed them once, let the shadows grow too long, but never again. The sun climbed higher, bathing the fields in warmth, and Grace made a silent vow to her parents, to herself, to every soul under her roof. No more silence, no more fear, only light, only fight, only home. She pulled Marisol into a hug, feeling her tremble, feeling her hold on, and whispered, "We're gonna make it together." And for the first time in years, Grace believed it.